How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for asking. But I'm really, really curious around how your feeling has either stayed the same or has changed from the time you touched ground in Nairobi to how you feel at this moment.
Hmm. It's definitely changed because I was just curious coming in and excited, right? And now I've like integrated with some of the people here and the musicians, and I'm learning so much. So it's gone from curiosity to definitely feeling at home. The people have been so hospitable, and then like creatively excited just because I'm experiencing different people's creativity.
Stimuli.
Yeah. I'm excited.
Oh, glad to know. Glad to know
And I'm
that
excited, but also I am experiencing the nerves of someone who's going to go on the
on the
stage.
stage. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But with someone who has had so many stages and has been on many stages,
Yeah.
I'm really surprised to hear that. Quite honestly, I thought that by now, you probably have a ritual that helps you get rid of all of that stuff. Does it still happen?
It still happens.
But why? It doesn't make sense.
I've heard that it's healthy that it happens. I think if it stops happening, there's also maybe you've let go a little too much or you don't care.
Your heart is no longer
Do you
in
know
it.
what I mean? So I think it is healthy. There's like a healthy amount of nerves that just have to do with caring. Yeah. And then also, it is my first time in East Africa completely. You know what I mean? So it's like, it feels new. Yeah.
How much of your personality gets captured in the music in general? Are you the type that really infuses who you are as a person, or is there a distance that you create between the music that you create and who Leo Mille is?
I don't think that there's a distance I create, but I think that the perspective differs, right?
Okay.
So depending on whether I'm kind of relaying a personal experience,
Yeah.
that might make I think people might perceive that as being more personal or more infused with my personality, versus if I'm speaking maybe on a social matter, you're still kind of getting to hear my voice, but there is this kind of like third person, you know. So, but everything it's very personal. I think it's always about me and what I believe, and I think I'm working on two different projects right now. I'm working on an EP, a short EP, and then I'm working on an album.
Okay.
And I think like those perspectives are so different. One of them is like I'm relaying almost from a third person narrative, and it's like a folk tale. Yeah, it's inspired by a Basotho folk tale.
Right.
And then the other one is kind of matches of the heart and very emotional about like change and evolution and loss and friendships and relationships falling apart. So I think like that might seem more personal than the other from an outsider's perspective, but both are very personal.
Two different vantage points that will give us and the world and the audience two different sort of perspective of who you are. Yeah. That's really a wide. What inspired that?
The folktale.
Both of them, like these two decisions to approach it this way.
So the folktale came. The one for that's inspired by the folktale, Basotho folktale, came before, during the lockdown period, and a few months even before. I think the lockdown started. I was back at home, and I think something about being back home reminded me of my childhood. And one of the things that my father used to do was tell us folktales as bedtime stories. Yeah. So I think because I was attending to kind of my inner child a lot in that time, this came up as like, yeah, there was a nostalgia around that time, but I also started to see myself in some of those characters. Like when you're young, you're kind of maybe mindlessly consuming, you're entertained, but you never think that it's going to stay with you, and then it stays with you, and the meaning of the folktale kind of evolves with you as you grow. And so I saw so much of myself in the character of Takane. It's inspired by a folktale, yeah, Takane le Masilo.
Okay.
Yeah. So I saw so much of myself in the character of Takane, and I was fascinated. I was fascinated by our stories and how they've always been so kind of futuristic already, you know, and this idea of bringing the ancient, of sourcing kind of the future from the ancient, right? And also, I guess, validating the fact that we've always been very progressive as Africans. We've always been kind of like time travelers and always been, you know what I mean? Yeah, they're so rich in all the things that I'm fascinated by. And I just wanted to explore that a little further. And it was a challenge as well to kind of think, how can I infuse myself into this, what seems like a story that's separate from me, but it's so personal. Yeah.
Yo, I'm really really curious because as a history fanatic to some
Yeah.
degree, I'm always curious about the origins of people, the origins of species, the
Yeah.
origins of practices, the origins of culture in generally. Is there anything that was surprising you in terms of what you discovered about the Sotho people or Basotho people during this exploring of the storytelling?
So I did discover quite a few things. I read a paper that was an academic paper by Francis Rakotswane that was discussing kind of Basotho spirituality and Mudimo as the water snake, right, in Basotho culture, right. So I've always been very interested in, I guess, our indigenous religion, so to speak, right? Because obviously we had a religion, right, and a way in which we perceived God, and I'm always very fascinated and I'm a little sad about that erasure. So I was very fascinated by this exploration of Basotho religion or understanding of Mudimo or our spiritual practice as Botu, as interconnectedness, right? Versus kind of one particular ritual, like maybe going to church on a Sunday or prayer, right? And Francis Rakotswane speaks a lot about how our spiritual practice was what we did and not what we believed, right? Yeah, and that, it was so interweaved with our daily practice. It wasn't something that was separate. Of course, there were rituals and ways in which we kind of appealed to a higher power for specific circumstances, but there wasn't this sense of separation. And I really, really, it makes sense to me. Just, yeah, it resonates very, very closely with me. And exploring that, and then obviously just being fascinated by these, like, I was fascinated by this idea of underwater civilizations that seems to exist in many different, like, indigenous
I mean,
cultures.
we got Avatar right now, for instance, which
We've
is
got,
a retelling. Anyway, yeah.
yes, yes, we've got Avatar, we've got even like the most recent Black Panther, which
Oh
I think
yeah,
was
there
focused.
was a
There was, yeah, I think they drew from the Aztecs and whatever, but just like I'm really fascinated by this idea of like why so many indigenous communities have these underwater civilizations, and yeah, I think I'm just fascinated by the ways in which humans are malleable, and I think that like we're having this human experience, but we're so vast and like we exist in so many ways in so many spaces. So yeah, I was fascinated by digging for kind of these clues of the expansiveness of the human condition, but like in our own folklore.
what has been your observation and what has been, I mean, I don't know if it's reflected in the body of work that you are telling around the impact of climate in general, Koba Sotu.
Ooh, that's such a big question. I mean, definitely it goes back to what I'm speaking about this idea of. So, Butu, obviously, when you think about the concept of Butu casually, you kind of think of it as a generosity and an acknowledgement of, someone else's humanity. But it's also this idea of our interconnectedness. It's that recognizing yourself in the other that, yeah, that makes that concept of Butu. But it extends beyond people.